We are live on YouTube.
All righty, welcome everybody. It's Friday, March 24th. This is the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee, and we are here right now to take a little bit more testimony on S50, an act relating to increasing the size of solar net metering projects that qualify for expedited registration. I'm Representative Kathleen James from Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. John's.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Darren Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klubner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Laura Sibilia, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant.
Great, John.
John Brabant from Monmouth Clean Environment.
All righty, Peter. For the record.
Hi, Peter Sterling, Director of Renewable Energy Vermont. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes on your Friday to go through this stuff.
We have until 2.
Oh my God.
I mean, we don't have to have until 2, but that,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to say before I go into my presentation that I heard some questions and comments brought up during Senator Watson's presentation on the bill and Ellen Schakowsky's walkthrough that I think I can answer. I have notes, so
Great.
try to get to that. And of course, if you ask any question one way. Okay. By the way, 25 is the new 15 is that's literally the most creative thing I've ever done in my life. I'm a very creative person, but coming up with that title has made me smile since I thought of it over the summer.
I'm not sure that our 25 birthday boy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh, who would have thought? All right, let's jump to that first slide there. First, I just want to run through net metering super quick. And I guess this isn't, I don't want to, maybe it's mansplaining, it's energy nerd-splaining. I don't know.
Good.
Okay. So net metering allows people to generate solar power for their own use and then send extra solar power to the grid from where they live and work. That's people receive credit on their electric bills for the extra power they generate. About 22,000 homes and businesses are enrolled in the net metering program in Vermont. The 2024, last year's res reform bill, eliminated off-site or virtual net metering as a cost reduction measure. I think that's come up in this committee a couple times. And since 2021, residential net metering customers have paid a fee in the form of a negative rate adjuster, which is that chart down to the left there, on the power they use behind the meter. And that's an important concept. That's how one of the main ways the PUC adjusts net metering compensation every 2 years. And so what you could see in that chart on the lower left there is that 7 times in the last 8 years, the PUC has reduced that compensation that Vermonters receive for net metering. And some of that is justified in that the price of deploying solar has come down. But what you can see on that table to the right is, for at least according to my opinion, would be that they've adjusted the rate down so much that we're seeing fewer and fewer Vermonters net metering, a 16% decrease in net metering since 2018 and 27% since the post-COVID high in 2021.
Can we stop before you go on? Sure. Are you done with that slide?
I have one more.
Okay.
So this morning I heard from Representative Campbell about a comment about what happens with the RECs from net metering. So for on-site net metering, the residential stuff, if an individual wanted to keep those RECs, they would pay a fee of 4 cents a kilowatt hour, which, let's say you're using a bunch of solar, you have like an EV, it's like $400 or $500 a year. So almost no individual ever keeps their RECs. They sell them essentially to the utility. The developer on the residential stuff really has nothing to do with it. If it was off-site net meter, the developer sometimes is involved. But if you're putting solar where you live, your developer really has nothing to do with it.
So where is that agreement happen?
It happens when you sign up with, let's say,
with the developer?
With the developer. The developer gives you the form and says, supposed to explain to you, you have a choice about whether to keep your RECs or not. I advise you to sell your RECs to the utility so you get a cheaper rate. But there are some people who it's important to own those RECs so they can legally say they are 100% solar. You can't legally say that without owning RECs. Almost no residential customer keeps the RECs.
But where it's written down is in the contract.
In the contract,
with the developer.
yes, that's right. And there are mistakes that have been made, which is why I think S50 tried to address that. Okay, so now I'm done with this slide.
Okay, so I have a 101 question.
Sure.
So unless we quantify it by saying we're talking about virtual offsite net metering or,
On-site.
yeah. So this bill and the net metering that we're talking about in S50 and today is entirely residential scale?
Yes, yes.
This is you and me
So
putting
you
solar
could
on
be a
our,
very small business. So you could be like a pretty small business that doesn't use an enormous amount of electricity in their business. Under 25 kW is 90% of the time is going to be a family looking to electrify, get EVs and heat pumps. You know, there may be a business that doesn't use a ton of electricity, like a law firm, you know, wants to have 25 kW to meet all their like heat pump needs, but you would never have a commercial application, any kind of commercial application where you're using electricity, you would blow past 25 kW in mix. So this is really all, I would say 90% of these, 95% of these are people putting something in their backyard.
okay, and we had another question come up, and maybe we just haven't gotten there yet,
No.
but in S50, are we talking about, we had a question about, it specifically mentioned ground mounted.
Yeah, that's
And
all. That was.
Are we gonna get to that later?
I'll say
Okay,
it
so we
now.
were like, is this
Yeah,
also
totally.
rooftop or, you know,
So,
I'm just trying to
the-
understand exactly what this
The
bill
roof,
applies.
the law in Vermont is that you can put up to a 500 kW system on your roof and go through the fast application process. 500 kW is the limit. I mean, that is huge. I mean, that's like 3 acres of solar panels. So you'd have to be a massive big box store or something to even want to come close to that. But up to 500 kW on the rooftop gets the fast application. And anything over 15 on the ground has to go through the long process. Currently,
Say it one more time. So up to
up
500
to 500
kilowatt on the
kW
roof.
on a roof, and a roof does not include a canopy. That's considered a ground mounted.
Right, I mean,
Yeah,
I
just wanna make it clear.
You
It's literally
couldn't
on
build
your-
you can't build a new roof, but you could
No.
build a new barn.
Correct. If you built a barn and put it on the barn, that would be okay. That's a roof.
So it's
Not
not,
a canopy is
it's
not
not necessarily old roof.
correct.
I thought at one point it was an existing roof.
No, you can, you know, if you were to build a brand new barn or a brand new big box store and you want to put 250 kW on that, you would get to use the fast application process up to 500 kW. And again, that's like 3 acres. That's like a massive solar array.
Okay, and S50 doesn't contemplate or get into that.
Nope.
We're talking about ground mounted.
What we're trying, the goal of S50 is to make it easier for Vermonters who want to go solar in their backyard,
Mhm.
and they can only put it on the ground for whatever reason. They don't have a good roof or old roof that can't hold weight. They want to put it on the ground in their backyard to make it a little easier for them to do that. It doesn't, we don't need to touch the rooftop process because there's no problem with the rooftop process.
What's the advantage of the fast track? What?
Oh, we're going to go into that in great detail. Yeah, probably too much detail, to be honest.
Brett Kutner?
Remind us that Senator Watson testified that due to the evolution of the technology, you can now a 25K array is the same size as
Definitely, it's already that in the
15K. You
presentation.
got that? Okay.
Totally.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Brett Campbell.
Another basic question.
I love that you're asking me all the questions that I actually know how to answer later. In That's like really working
Yeah,
out.
that's good.
Translate,
Yeah.
let's say 25 kW, 2 kilowatt hours per year.
Okay, I do that later in the,
Okay.
in the slide too. So I'll tell you now, so you have it.
I got 15,000.
Oh, that's good. I had 18,000. We must be using different capacity.
I'm
factors.
sorry, I was rotating 15
Oh, you
degrees.
are?
We
Energy
went
nerd.
east to-
I use I use the 14% capacity factor on a fixed ground, non-bifacial.
Yeah.
You're beyond me.
All right. I use the one that Department of Public Service uses. Okay.
Okay, back
Here we
we go to 2014.
Okay, in 2014, Act 99 established that ground mount arrays under 15 kilowatt AC use a quick registration process, while ground mount arrays between 15 and 150 kilowatt must go through a lengthier application process. So I have 2 pictures there. That's on the left, there's a 150, and on the right, there's a backyard 15 that would have to, those 2 projects of that size would have to go through the same multi-month, many $1,000 process. And they do not seem like the same projects. So Representative Campbell, this gets to your question, the next slide. Modern solar panels can produce 28% more solar power using almost the same amount of land. So when this law was passed, your typical residential solar panel is about 250 to 290 watts. Now, because of the efficiencies, folks can put up 485 watt panels. So we could put a lot more solar, much more efficient solar panels in the same spot. So if you look at the pre-2017 array using those older 320 watt panels, that's 108 feet and change bound by 13 feet. And that's a 15 kW. And then the new ones with the 485 watt panels are going 109 feet. So that's a foot longer and 1311. So that's another foot longer, foot wider, but producing 28% more power in the same physical footprint. So I believe it's fair to say that the legislative intent of this bill was to limit the land use kind of footprint of these solar arrays. And I think you're largely hewing to that by increasing it to 25 kW, just for the only reason that solar panels are now almost twice as efficient as they were when the law was written in 2014.
You mentioned bifacial, so, if you wanted to do that, did you end up going over 25 kW?
When we were thinking, when I was talking to rep members and we were conceiving we wanted to make sure we were not creating some land use impacts that were going to be not appropriate. So if you're using more than 25 kW at home, you are, that's a lot of solar for most people. I mean, there may come a time we want to raise it to 30 or something, like the panels got more efficient, but very few people at home for purely residential reasons would use more than 25 kW. When you have an array bigger than 25 kW, you're probably using a lot of electricity for something, I guess.
So could you have a smaller footprint?
Yes, you would have a small, that's right. You would just have a smaller footprint because you really, and with net metering, when you generate more credits than you can use, you don't get money for them. They expire after a year. So you just give it to the utility. So the developer who's helping you to install your solar would always say, how much power do you think you're using now? Will you use? Are you going to get an EV? Are your kids moving back in and you're going to leave lights on all the time? They go through all that stuff and you'd size it for the right way for what you would need.
You're gonna go to the legislature and not look at that.
So again, 25 kW to me is probably the reasonable limit that you would reasonably expect a house that is electrifying everything to probably get to.
Could you explain bifacial?
Sure.
Is that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, most solar panels, they're cheaper. They just generate power on one side, the side facing the sun. Bifacial have it on two sides. You can generate solar power from the bottom and the top.
From the reflective.
Yeah. You can rotate them and stuff like that.
Well, right, but
Pretty cool.
They get a little bit of reflection off
Totally.
a medium or.
Totally. So some people use those to make just more efficient.
And, I presume the limits are the same whether you're doing a fixed array or whether you're doing trackers.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 25 kW is the size limit, what we think is reasonable, again, for what a family would be using at home for their residential uses, not commercial or industrial. So I think this came up a little while during the walkthrough. The difference between the application and the registration process, I'll let you all read these, but I think you just jump to the bottom two. For the application process, which again is for the bigger arrays, it's usually about 4 months, and it costs between $5,000 and $20,000 to complete that with consultants and the permitting you have to do. And the registration process, the fast one, it's usually in less than 15 days. I know my people would say it's almost never. They said never more than 30 days, and there's no additional costs. And again, if you're a homeowner and you want to electrify and you want more power, you're not going to wait months and months and spend extra thousands. You're just, the stats I'll go through later, just you cap it at 15. You don't build the extra 10 kW because it's just too much money. It's not worth the hassle.
So Peter on the left,
Mhm.
so that's the full-on certificate of public good
All right.
process.
That's right.
Okay. So
Well,
application.
just to be clear, both of these need a certificate of public good.
Okay.
They're both regulated by section 248, but one is just an application that the PUC has developed for larger projects to fully understand the scope and all that stuff, like that 150 that was in the opening slide. The registration process is part of this, is a CPG technically. It's just a faster way to get to it.
Okay. So full application versus the expedited
That's right.
registration.
That's right.
Rep. Clifton?
And just for completeness, what's the difference if you go over 150K for ground mount?
There's a different application where you're notifying, I think, I have to look into the exact terms. I'm not an expert on that, but you have to do more
This is
work,
more,
more notifying landowners, more permitting, more things like that. You have to answer more questions. All right. So, Representative Campbell, oh, you have a question?
Yeah, so
Yep.
used to be a distribution engineer. When does the utility get involved so that they can have the system protection?
Excellent question. They, in both, in the fast, registration process, they get a notification immediately and they have up to 10 days. And if they decide they can't interconnect it, it's not safe, it's too costly, they can still stop it.
Or if they need
But they need
additional
more
time?
information, totally.
Initial, okay.
This
All right,
has
so they-
this, right, this, nothing in this touches the utility's ability to stop a project they feel they cannot connect safely or properly.
Yeah,
Okay, so, just to give you a scope of some of the, next slide, sample annual electric consumption in a modern home. Your average load, and this is just someone who doesn't have heat pumps and doesn't do EVs, is about 6,700 kilowatt hours a year. And you can see from some of the lists that I put out there, if you add to that 6,700, excuse me, a heat pump and a couple of EVs, you would blow past the 18,000 kilowatt hours of a 15 kW system pretty quick. So a 15 kW, give or take, is 18,000 kilowatt hours. So you would get past that 18,000 super quick with some heat pumps, EVs, and things like that. And I thought this was a pretty cool stat at the bottom that we came up with. Building a 25 kW instead of a 15 kW produces enough extra electricity you get from the same physical footprint to power a Ford Lightning for over 25,000 miles. So it's real extra solar. This would make a difference. I mean, that's a lot of electricity. So it's cool.
So you're saying a 15 kW, it's just it produces around 18,000.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you said 25 times.
No, no, 18, roughly 18,000 kilowatt.
Okay.
So, sorry, I'm still on this
Yeah.
slide. So, since we're not in a hurry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding
Okay.
and that we're not blowing through stuff. So,
Okay.
all right. So the average residential load is 6,700 a year. And
I
then,
just want to be clear, like that average really does, averages can represent a lot of things, right? Like here it's $1 million, I earn $1, our average income is 500,000. That doesn't mean it's, working out so good. No, but that average, really does represent a household that does not have any kind of extra electric use, like heat pumps. The average is low. It's really just someone running refrigerators, lights, stuff like that.
okay, so that's the average load. And
Yeah.
then the stats you're showing below are
How much each of those new technologies would add to that average load.
would add. Okay,
Yes.
so the total would be,
I mean, let's say you wanted to do the heat pumps for your house, right?
yeah.
You're probably putting up 15,000 kW. You need another 15,000 kilowatt hours.
Mhm.
So you have the 15,000 to the 6,700 and you've blown way past 18,000 that a 15 kW can generate. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
The 15 kW number isn't on there. I probably should have put it on there.
all right. And the 25 kW provides how
About
much?
30,000 kilowatt hours. That's
Is that
not
on there?
either. No, I should have brought down in hindsight. I just have a no.
Okay,
Well, y'all are asking a lot more good questions in the Senate. They were just
Huh?
like, they
okay.
blew past this stuff.
Oh, well,
I liked it.
we're sort of understanders.
I-
So, all right, so a 25K, which is what we're talking about in this bill,
Yep, it's about
is going
30,000
to produce about 30,000.
kilowatt hours, and a 15K is about 18,000.
Okay, and a 15K equals 18,000.
Right.
So if you want to put in a 25K, you're going to generate about 30. So you could add on that, say you've got your average load and then you've got an EV, we're at 10,700. And then you want to do a couple more of these things. All right. Okay.
This just allows you, like I said, I think that the 25 kW limit should really allow a Vermonter who wants to electrify to generate the power they need at home. It's a reasonable threshold. Yep.
But this is a year-round usage. And in the present, net metering, if you overgenerate in 1 month, you get the, average rate for 1 credit. Am I correct that that's being reduced at all? That, so that the differential, let's take the Green Mountain Power rate at 20 cents a kilowatt hour. You store using the utility's battery or the utility as a battery.
Right.
And you only get 15-cent credit.
Right.
So when you buy back in the winter, you're paying the 20 cents. And what about the energy efficiency charge? Just over a penny.
Well, we're talking about a couple different things then. So when you generate solar, you get a rate every 2 years. The PUC adjusts the net metering rate up or down. Usually it's down, right? To a new number. Usually, but when you sign that contract, right, you're locking in a certain rate
for 10 years.
For 10 years with the adjusters you paid for. Let's say right now I would lock in, if I get it today, I would lock in whatever the blended rate is plus whatever the adjusters the PUC said need to happen. Right now it's 4 cents off, right?
If you keep the rec.
No. It's 4 cents off if you keep the rec and 4 cents off just for owning the solar, which I'll explain later why it's important to understand. It's a great question. What I'm saying is if in 2 years the PUC now goes from a 4 cent adjuster to 5 cents, I don't pay the 5 cents. I have a contract for the 4 cents because I signed up during the net metering rate, the 4 cent adjuster. So for monitors, that's what, when you sign up for a meter, you get the certain adjuster. Now the blended rate goes up and down, as we know, but the adjusters don't change. So you get a set rate for the adjuster
For a 10-year period.
For a 10-year period. And then after 10 years, your positive adjusters go away. So if you were old school and you were getting paid more for solar, that goes to zero. But if let's say after 10 years and I had the 4 cent adjuster, and in 10 years from now it's 8 cents, I don't pay the 8 cents. I just go to zero. I keep my negative 4 cents. I don't get the new one. It's only the positive adjusters went away because that made solar got paid a lot. We can talk about why that happened later. But yes, your positive adjusters go away after 10 years. Your negative ones stay with you forever. But the PUC does adjust those every 2 years. So a new person coming on would get the new adjusters every 2 years in the sun. Clear as mud. You can talk about this more.
Hey.
I sense the vibe in the room that we might have to walk through this beyond this. Okay. The next.
Senate moves fast on everything. We are not the speedy people.
I mean, they have 2 committees. They have all those people to listen to back home. Y'all get to dig in on.
No, we do. It's great.
It is.
Okay, so we're on the cost slide.
Okay, and so now we can go to potential costs. Even if all 129 homeowners who put up a 15 kW in last year had instead put up a 25 kW, they were not going to do. The cost shift, and even using the Public Service Department's highly flawed methodology, which I will go into, would only be 15 cents a year to the average Vermont household. So let's say everyone who wanted to put up a 15 went to 25, it's only 15 cents a year. And even that number is overinflated for reasons I will go into on the next slide. And again, I just have a picture of, this is what a 17 kW looks like, right? I mean, it's clearly in someone's backyard. My solar folks, when I asked them about this, they said almost every single one of these, you could never really afford to trench it. You have to bury the line from your house more than even 200 feet would be a lot. There is nobody putting these half a mile in their field way far away. You put this next to your house because it's really expensive to dig that trench and put it. So these are truly in your backyard. This isn't someone owning, 5 acres that digging,
Okay. And so the cost argument here, obviously, is that the bigger the array, the more you're generating, so the bigger a discount that you're getting on the metering, so that's where the cost shift comes in.
That's right.
Okay.
Supposing caution.
Yeah.
No,
well, I know we'll get to that.
That's
Just
the next
understand the underlying
exactly right.
argument. Right.
Right. top line, and we'll go into the next. Top line is net metering enrollees receive higher rate to net meter because of some of the benefits, and that rate is spread out. That extra cost that the utility pays to get that net meter power is then spread out amongst its whole customer base. And in this case, if you look statewide, it would be, 14 cents could be extra caution. So this is a little away from the policy that we're talking about, but I did want to explain about that cost shift because I think, well, I know this committee hasn't talked about net metering yet, and I'm sure you will at some point, but I thought it'd be a good time to maybe just take a minute to talk about this net metering cost shift and the values behind net metering. Because I think you had brought up to Senator Watson about the biennial report about had she read about how the department says net metering is the most expensive form of power, which you're actually right about. It's true. But so with permission from the committee, can I go into this for a minute, even though it's a little off of what S
Sure.
is about? Okay. Before I go into what's on the slide, I just, let me just give an example. Like a lot of times we do things because of our values. And here's an example, right? That values that are not quantifiable. My wife loves books, and I buy her a book every Christmas from the Bear Pond bookstore downtown. I like them. They're nice people. But if I were to look at my bill for that book, it's 20% more than me ordering it on Amazon. That is true. I literally bought that book the most expensive way possible, but there's a value there that I can't really quantify. That bookstore exists in the downtown that I like. But the bill, I just looked at my bill on my credit card, it's 20% more. I chose not to save that 20% because there's a value to that bookstore that I can't quantify. I think net metering there is something similar to that with net metering in that there are values to Vermonters owning their own solar, having solar where they live that you don't always see. That just doesn't show up just on a rate bill. I do think there is something similar there. Okay.
Rep. Southworth?
So with that being said,
Yeah.
how do you sell that to low and income rural communities and people?
That their rate, they pay a slightly higher rate,
Right.
So other people can net meter. Well, I think if we go into some of the values, we can do that. First of all, I would argue that we should make it more affordable and help low income people own their own solar. I think that would be a really important thing to do. So let's, and if I go through this slide, I think I talk about some of the other good things that happen when we have net metering. So, net metering, you do two things, right? You have this solar where you live, and let's say your car is plugged in and the sun is shining. You are taking solar right from your roof, and it goes right without touching the grid. It goes right into your car, and that's called behind the meter generation, right? That's one aspect. The other part is the extra power you export into the grid, and that's what the utility is paying you more money for, right? So the Department of Public Service calculates the cost shift for net metering, and that's the equation right there. It's lost sales plus above market electricity that the utility pays for. There are two components to this cost shift: lost sales from the utility and the above market electricity costs that the utility pays. And I'll explain what utility means.
I'm just letting that
Yeah.
penetrate.
Okay. So, the lost
Rep.
sale.
Kimball? Sorry.
Sorry, guys, sorry, to clarify that. So every interconnected roof behind the meter panel setup is set up so that it feeds the electric load in the house and satisfies that load before it goes to the back.
Yeah,
That's
that's
the way they're all set up.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
So, and that stuff that goes right into your house is called behind the meter generation. It never touches that meter that goes out to the grid.
But there's another meter on
Yeah.
the panel.
Yeah.
So the utility does know,
100%.
and we pay the electric efficiency charge on the total usage in the house.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
So the lost sale, so what the utilities are saying, well, the department says, let's be clear in their calculation, that when we generate power that goes behind the meter that I use, that doesn't touch the grid, that's a lost sales to each utility. And because that's a lost sale, that is revenue that the utility cannot collect. And that is a problem. They say that is a problem for utilities, that Vermonters are using this energy behind the meter. I just want to be super clear. There is no other program in Vermont that has that same evaluation. So when Efficiency Vermont gives you or helps you get a new efficient refrigerator, that is a lost sale. You just used less electricity. The Department of Public Service does not say that lost sales. You are not cost shifting with your refrigerator to other ratepayers. That lost sales argument runs entirely counter to fighting climate change and putting up energy efficiency programs. Because every time, if Jack were to turn off this light because he wants to conserve energy in here, because he cares so much now, that would be technically be a lost sale.
25 years old.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jack. I didn't bring on the spot. Right. So anytime we conserve electricity, in theory, that's a lost sales to the utility, which should, according to this definition, cause a cost shift. But we would never evaluate a program like that as cost shifting. It only is for net metering that we count that as an expense.
Okay, so I would see it as a cost shifting, but because I mean, there's a cost to operating the grid.
Yeah.
But I'm intrigued by the efficiency argument and that this is the only place that lost sales are applied. And I'm thinking about that.
So the other thing that happened, and I have my nerd chart with me, of course, is that, and this is, again, we're talking about the PUC makes its adjustments to the net metering compensation.
Okay, can I just,
I'm going to, yeah.
well, I just want to make sure, Peter. So, I mean, if we're selling less power, that does shift the cost of operating the grid. It does.
Right.
It's, I mean,
Right,
because
but that's power, right, but that's, well, we're right. But let me just say that since 2019 here, that's right. Since 2021, net metered customers have been charged an adjuster on all their behind the meter generation. So when I do this behind the meter generation, now I pay 4 cents for each one of those kilowatt hours to contribute. That goes right to the utilities. They profit 4 cents for every kilowatt hour when and it doesn't touch their grid or anything. And that in theory helps compensate them for all their costs of maintaining the grid, that 4 cents adjuster. Because it's not energy they have to build extra wires for. It is not, right? It's just behind the meter. And that is not, I mean, we're putting up like 25 megawatts a year of net metered solar. I mean, that's a lot of megawatts of solar. They don't have to go purchase on the open market. They don't have to build extra poles and wires for. They don't have to hire more people to manage those poles. And getting that 4 cent adjuster is, not insane. That's what the PUC has determined as appropriate.
well, I'm just trying.
Yeah.
I did not realize that there are no other entities where that calculation.
Correct. None of Efficiency Vermont's program.
And we should hear from the department about this, but
Sure.
you're saying that it's only
It's only for net
net
metering.
metering.
That the
that
lost
cost
sales
share.
argument is calculated as part of a cost shift.
And what I'm also, sorry,
You're right. You go ahead.
I just have to reiterate. So what I'm also hearing is you saying, because that generated power never reaches the grid and it's powering my home first before it flows over, that it's not responsible for, necessary grid infrastructures, or it's not impacting grid capacity.
Right.
But to compensate for the fact that it is still lost sales, if that's how you look at it, a 4 cent a kilowatt hour fee adjuster is still being applied to kind of balance that out.
That's
Did I
right.
get all that?
Yeah. I mean, the PUC would not draw a direct line between the 4 cent adjuster and the grid maintenance cost. They've never said that in a ruling. I don't mean to imply that. What I'm
No, I said that.
Yeah,
I
that's
said
right.
that.
That's
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the utilities get 4 cents for every kilowatt hour of energy we all generate behind the meter for something they're not doing anything for. And that helps offset at the time the other grid costs that they do legitimately have to maintain. And that is a correct state. That is correct, I think.
That's not a question.
Well, Scott had his hand up. Unless,
So I guess I was not aware of this. First of all, I wasn't aware that was where the adjuster had gone, because
Yeah,
when I
right.
bought into a community solar field, I was getting an extra 6 cents.
Yeah,
I was getting
yeah.
6 cents positive.
Now,
That was 10 years ago now, I guess.
different time.
But so in effect, though, that 4 cents is a sales fee.
Yeah.
That the utility is collecting. And how does that compare to the sort of long-term wholesale contracts that most utilities have? It must be not very much less than that.
You know, I don't know. I'd have to really look into that. Thank you.
Anyway, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm just, in effect, we're paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour for that electricity. We're paying the utility 4 cents. Yeah.
Right. And there is a rationale, like
No,
there is some justifications for that.
certainly. I mean, you're using the grid of the battery, you're using all the
Right.
services of the grid.
Right.
All that's true.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just saying, like, behind the meter generators are paying something into, I believe through that 4 cent fee.
Yeah, yeah.
PUC may call something different, but they are paying into the greater good through that 4 cents.
Yeah.
So, but this lost sales is the gross loss of sales of 100 kilowatt hours that was generated. That they make 300 a day. They use 100 during the day. They use the other 200 at night when the sun's not shining. But it doesn't have a subtractor for the cost of the energy in that lost sales here. It's just total lost sales, 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Well,
Right.
above market rate. The above market rate is if they were paying 4 cents for a kilowatt hour, they're losing the 4 cents on the kilowatt and they're losing the 20 cents. But if they have to go out and buy it at 8 cents,
Right.
there's really
That's
so
So I haven't talked about the above market pump, but the lost sales, just to put it, an example here. So switching from electric hot water heater to a heat pump hot water heater would cause, in theory, a 3,800 kilowatt hour in lost sales, because you just used a lot of electricity, compared to a 7 kilowatt net metering array causes a 7,200 kilowatt hour in lost sales. And so just giving you an example, like that, when you switch to that hot water heater, and you now use 3,800 less kilowatt hours in a year, no one who's evaluating the efficacy of that program says that's a cost shift from a lost sale. It's only the cost shift from a lost sale on the 7 kilowatt net metering array. That's what I'm saying. And so when we hear this term cost shift used by people who are concerned about net metering, I just think that that's one of the ways that cost shift is a little bit inflating. I'm not sure it's really a full-on cost shift like that. And then I can go into the above market electricity part of it, answer more questions.
Okay.
those details after your statement here are really questions for the PUC and the commission
Sure.
and the department.
Right.
And I think that's
Yeah.
where.
Yeah.
They're
That's where
coming
we have
in
to
next
raise-
week.
Good.
Right, that's where we have to raise
All
that
right.
question.
So, in the middle of the slide, the Public Service Department's calculations of the above market electricity from net metering does not account for many of the benefits of behind the meter generation, including the historic savings from peak shaving and the value of grid upgrades paid for by net metering customers. So, for example, I have a 10 kW on my roof, right? I pay to connect that to the grid out of my pocket. And then when all these net metering people do, like that's like, every year we're putting out 20 or 30 megawatts of net metered solar. That's 30 megawatts of solar that's being connected to the grid that people are paying for, that the utility otherwise would have had to get that power and pay for it. So that's a big financial savings, those interconnections of all the net metering customers. Also, way back in the day, prior to, let's say, 2013 or one of the reasons in 2013, the department did a report and found there was no cost shift from net metering, in part because our peak was in the middle of the day. So when solar came on and it was cheaper, it actually cut that peak, to cut the utilities' need to buy peak power, which was really expensive. I don't have an exact peak number, but like if the average rate now is, I don't know, 14, 15 cents. That peak rate, I would bet, would be closer to like 20 cents. It's a lot more money. Peak power purchases are really where there's big bucks can be spent. So when net metering solar was shaving that peak, we were paying Vermonters, through this higher rate to shave the peak, we were actually saving utilities even more money, which is why, today in 2013, the department was saying there's no cost shift here because all that cost investment in net metering is actually stopping these peak power purchases, which is super expensive. That's good. Now our peak because we have so much solar, has moved from the afternoon to the evening, which is the department is now saying that the value of solar right now on the open market is like 7 cents. It used to be a lot higher. So there is definitely a cost shift. And I would argue that there is, residential net metering is probably the most expensive form of power now that we've eliminated offsite net metering, because that didn't even have behind the meter benefits, but it's not as expensive as I think people perceive. The cost shift is not as severe. For most residential ratepayers, new net metering coming online, other than WEC, which has its own kind of thing going on, every residential ratepayer and the other utilities is paying less than 35 cents a month for new net metering. The cost shift is not even that's using the department's formula. It's not a punitive number, I don't think, to most residential ratepayers for the values you get.
So, Peter, we're in the middle of an energy transition, right? So this is a very dynamic space, right? So we're increasing energy, increasing efficiency, switching fuels, building the grid. So it's, do you have an opinion? And I will ask the department this as well, and the PUC, like, what is the best way for a legislator to really see on balance kind of what is happening there? Because, what may like the cost shifts that were happening 5 years ago may be different than today, and they may be less or growing and they may be different. So do you understand the question I'm asking, which is on balance, what would be the best way for us to see that on balance, that transition?
Well, if you're talking about, are you saying what should our plan be to where do we get our power from? Is that like what are you trying to balance?
Yeah, maybe
because it would go back to that values piece that I talked about. If you just looked at pennies and a bill, you could probably try to shoot.
That's not what I'm asking. Okay. I'm not asking for like a dollar thing. I'm just asking, and I'm thinking about the energy, thinking about like a big and kind of thing, and like being able to view, how net metering may be becoming less expensive, maybe more expensive. We may be increasing the amount of electricity. Who's paying it? Yeah. Where's the cost shift happening?
So the first thing, one of the reasons I think we have to even talk about
solar's coming on, storage is coming on.
Unlike maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we probably will be having much different discussion because we all agree that load is going to grow. And that's the biggest. We need new power, right? People's loads are growing, right? We're going to plug in more cars. We're going to get more EVs. Regionally, the coal plants are coming offline. No one's building a new coal plant around here.
Who's paying for it? Right.
So since load is growing, we have to, like you're saying, think about what is this balance? What are we trying to do with the fact that we need more power? Where should new power come from? And how do we balance all of those needs, right? There is something to be said for building a bunch of energy in Vermont where we know we can control it. That's why I think ultimately the utilities signed on to that res bill. They liked the ability to have more energy built here in Vermont where they could control those processes. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think there was having a certain, that 20% of our power coming from in-state was something they thought was a good thing. That's why they signed on to the res bill. Now, there's certainly always going to be a need for Vermont to buy power from out of state.
They also liked to be, I'll put words in their mouth, to also have their own individual track. It was really important to them.
But, net metering, if interest rates are at a historic high last couple of years, and that really impacted consumers' ability to take out the loans to net meter. If interest rates come down, given that the production of solar panels can be cheaper, labor costs are high. Generally, solar gets a little cheaper each year, other than spiking interest rates, which really throw off the whole equation. But those same interest rates also impact the larger projects, you know. But overall, new solar is cheaper than new natural gas every time in this area, in New England, every single time. It's cheaper than new natural gas.
So Scott, we have 10 minutes left.
I only have one more slide.
No, that's okay. Scott,
Good
Rep
news.
Campbell.
Yeah, okay, so I'm still,
Yeah.
trying to flesh out the 4 cent cost and
Yeah,
in effect, that 4 cent, the negative 4 cents on a kilowatt hour, is moderating, maybe not eliminating, but moderating the lost sales
that's right.
argument, right?
I would say that.
It's we're paying for the lost sales.
That's right. Yeah. Remember, there's 2 4 cents right now. There's the 4 cents for the behind the meter generation, and there's the 4 cents if you choose to keep your rec. Those are 2 separate 4 cents.
Oh, so,
There are 2 buckets. If you were,
so it's actually zero.
no, it would be minus 8 cents.
It's minus 8 cents.
Yeah. If you kept your rec,
Oh, if you kept your
if you kept
Yeah,
your
right,
rec, so there's a 4. Earlier I talked about keeping the rec 4 cents,
Right, yeah.
but that's separate from the 4 cents behind the
Yeah,
meter.
yeah.
Adjust negative. Adjust.
Right.
That's great.
So,
That's great.
Okay.
so that's that, but therefore the formula that they're using is almost entirely, the retail, there's the fact that, the customer is getting paid, of course, getting their bill offset, they're getting paid in effect, the retail, rate of electricity minus the 4 cents.
They're getting what's called the blended residential rate. It's not a retail. It's called the blended residential rate, and it's set in statute the way the department has to calculate
Okay.
that. So it's not the retail.
Not the retail rate.
The retail rate, that would be very different.
Okay. And the blended retail, I do remember that.
And the
phrase. Yeah. Okay.
And just to put a finer point on it, every time the compensation for net metering goes down, those adjusters, that just pushes out the payback period for a consumer who makes the choice about whether to net meter. That's what really comes down to for most people, is when you meet with someone, you want to go solar. Well, I got to take out a loan. Is it going to be a 10-year loan, a 12-year loan, a 15-year loan? With where we are now with these adjusters, for most people, it's pushing over 15 years, which pushes a lot of people away. So to your question earlier, and your point earlier about how do you make it more attractive to low income folks, I would say if we were to have a program that would allow them to net meter and brought that payback period down to 5 years, like that, most people can't just part with 20 grand and have it be paid back.
Well, that's kind of my point. When you're looking at low and moderate income people,
Yeah.
they can't afford another payment. So that
Right.
they can't afford a loan payment. That if they
Right.
could, they may make the choice on their own.
Right. Most
But I
folks,
just want to be very careful.
That's correct. Most people who go solar, what they usually do is most people size their project in a way that the monthly payment on that loan would be roughly equivalent to their electric bill. Right. So
The savings of the electric bill.
yeah, right. That's how you size your array. So it's just that you're making that kind of investment in your house, and not everyone wants to wait 15 years for that investment to pay off. Well, I'll just pay my electric bill and deal with that. Like, again, a lot of people don't want to wait 15 years to pay off that loan versus just dealing with their electric bill every month. So you're not usually, when you go solar at home, you're not really, if you have a loan, most times you're not taking on an expense. You're usually sizing it to be the loan payment to be the size of your average electric bill.
Well, I'll just kind of counter that with the cost of the upgrades to panels and this and that. That's an expense that is there and that's real and it's large.
Yeah, that's right.
On top of the solar.
But you wouldn't upgrade your panel just because you went solar on your roof. You wouldn't need to put a new panel in for that. You only need a new panel when you're trying to put more power out.
Right. But in the guise of having an EV.
Oh, totally. Oh, 100% correct. Oh, yeah, 100%
So
correct.
that's
100%.
where I
That's right.
need to make that balance
100%.
on cost.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That is a big cost. This guy just spent $12,000 to upgrade a panel. That's terrible.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Rep.
100%
Kleffner?
agree.
I will say, a decade ago or so, when we built an off-site net meter facility, at Danforth, the developer apparently felt they could do it this way. They got the land for free because it was on an employee's land in return for providing her with free electricity for her deal. And our deal with them was, we don't pay the electric bill anymore. We just pay them.
Yeah.
And our deal was it needs to be 5% below market.
Oh, wow.
We got the discount on the electricity. The developer felt they could make money with everything they had to put into building it. I mean, they did get the land for the cost of whatever that small residence took.
Right.
But it made everybody happy.
Yeah. You know, that's a little different project than what we're talking about
Yeah.
because it's more scalable.
Yeah.
So with incredible luck, I'm on my last slide.
Yeah,
This has been a great.
No, we've been here.
Just slow Peter down a little bit. Okay.
That's not that easy to do. So to bring it back home to 25 is the new 15, we're talking about two similar sized arrays, two very different results. The larger backyard projects have not been built. So there's an example on your left of a 14.9 kW in Barnard and a 25, both are in someone's backyard. They're both, they're not that different in size. Only 12 CPG applications have been filed since 2020 for projects 15 to 25 kW, meaning when you're a homeowner and you are presented with the option to go to 25 kW under the current permitting scheme, you do not want to wait and pay the extra money to get the bigger array. You just put the 15 in and that's all you do. And we think raising this fast permitting process up to 25 kW would just help more people go solar where they live, and utilities still have the exact same ability to stop a project they don't think is appropriate, but it just saves expense and time for homeowners wanting to electrify and go solar at home.
Brett Southworth?
Do you have any sense of if this was to happen, how many people you would see take advantage of it?
Oh, yeah. So like I said in the earlier slide, there were 129 homeowners who put in arrays up to 15, put in a 15 kW. How many of those 129 go to 25 kW? I mean, I would imagine at least half of them.
Right, but I'm talking about new application. I'm not talking about existing. I'm talking about new.
Well, I'm saying these are all the people who made the decision. In 2024, 129 people made the decision to put up a 15 kW right at the limit of the fast. 129 people made a decision. Let's say 2025, it's the same 129 people. How many of them with this law in place would make the decision to go up to 25? I bet most of them would. Because if you're putting up a 15 kW, you're probably thinking you're going to electrify stuff. And you're probably going to want more power. So I bet you the most of them would take, many of them would take advantage. It would not be, it wouldn't be a dozen or two, it would be a bunch.
Well, you're talking about adding to existing.
No, he's saying that, if you assume that every year 130
Okay.
people.
That's
That's
the part that I missed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Assumption of
Yeah.
that.
You said that.
Thank you.
So 130 people stopped at 15, either because it was the limit or that's all they needed. How many installations were there at 10, 8, 5? What's the smallest people apply? You said 30 megawatts. Somebody run the numbers quick, 115 times, 15, 225. So you had 30. You only have about 8 megawatts. You only had about 8 megawatts not accounted for. Okay.
Well, maybe a couple of those were old 500s going.
Well, no, but they were, so
We can ask the PUC.
The average
about the
size of
number
a
of
residential array now is 10
But mine-
kilowatts.
the average.
The
is
average
10.
is a 10. It used to be a 7, but people are using more power these
Right,
days.
and
the
they're
average is a
planning, and
10.
they're planning more.
And I think based on what my solar folks are telling me, a lot of people would take advantage of this faster process because they want to electrify at home and they're stopping too many people.
And some of the old 8s and less smaller is the smaller roof. Somebody filled their roof.
Right,
They didn't wing out.
Yeah.
They didn't build
Yeah.
additions to build more.
Right.
So that's another issue.
Yeah, that is different.
Okay.
So I'm happy to answer more questions. One thing if I could take in my last minute plan to see with you all, I mean, there's clearly a lot of questions in it about net metering is, with the Public Utility Commission, the next time they're going to adjust the net metering rate will start in January of 2026. That rate will come out in May of 26. And it will go into effect in September of 26. So the Public Utility Commission in January is going to start their process to readjust the net metering compensation. Given that the last 7 times they've adjusted it, it's gone down. One would reasonably assume that the Public Utility Commission is going to adjust downward the rate for that Vermonters receive to net meter. You know, originally with net metering, the General Assembly set the rate for net metering, then it eventually over time it handed it to the PUC to go set that rate. At some point, maybe in this committee, we can have a discussion on what it would be the role, what kind of direction should let the General Assembly give the PUC about making sure Vermonters can net meter at home. That's just that conversation.
Did you see the Velco
Yes.
last night, yesterday?
No, I didn't see Belco
Yeah,
yesterday.
that Velco yesterday, they seem to give the impression that they can't handle more local generation to get it out of the system during the
Certain
peak
parts.
time, peak times of the day, that they're overloading. And I specifically asked, I don't know if they listened, but they said, they said a minimum demand of internal load so that the homeowner is not home, but generating
Yeah,
and
right.
it just has casual refrigerator type
Yeah.
use. And that they were overloading certain parts of the
Yep.
system because of the funding growth.
I have looking at that. I mean, generally Belco is accurate when it's something they're very good at what they do. There is no doubt there are parts of Vermont that are grid constrained. Belco has a plan to upgrade,
But you can't build there.
but you would not be able to interconnect. And the utility would stop you from interconnecting. Even like even a 10 kW rooftop, would not get interconnected. WEC stops those all the time when on the parts of their service territory where their infrastructure is not able to handle it. Like even like a small rooftop, the WEC is telling their members, you can't connect that.
That's all also worst case scenario. That was N minus one, minus one.
And minus one.
Right, so they're
right.
designing for the absolute
They're
worst case scenario, redundancy.
Lost line.
Right, so we need to just keep that in mind.
Yes,
It's not
yes,
like current
yes,
conditions, that,
I would also add that I talked a little while ago to a guy who's starting a company specifically to do on-site solar and battery storage with no bi-directional. It's just to power the house.
Oh, yeah.
And
Off grid.
Yeah.
Like what?
you can still be connected,
Right, you can pay
but
it.
you're not feeding the grid in any way. You're
You
feeding
have-
your house, and if you generate more than you need,
You got the fire department connected. The fire department's on call with the electric line, but you're not using it.
Yeah.
The hose isn't.
But that wouldn't be through the net metering program.
Correct.
Paying out of pocket. That's
Right, but I'm just saying that there is an economic model where that works, where you're not selling electricity back to the grid.
100%.
So in these constrained transmission and distribution pockets, people can still power their homes.
That's right.
But they can't, any excess they generate, they can't put into the grid.
Yeah, Rep. Torrey?
A really quick, question for you. So we heard about, a new proceeding that's gonna happen around resilience. And I'm kind of excited to know
Yeah.
what that could show in terms of the value of distributed generation as a resilience.
I'm very excited about that too.
But
I
it
think-
hasn't started yet. so-
No, but my guess would be that it would show that just it would increase the value of distributed solar, distributed resources. You'd really be having a greater understanding of when there's a microgrid in Rochester, what value does that bring into ratepayers? And that's a self-sufficient area in case there's a flood. Like that happens with we using investing in distributed solar and energy storage. So yeah, I think that docket will be very exciting and should give us some real good information on the value of Vermont producing more power here, being more resilient. Yeah. So thank you so much. Warms them up
Peter?
for you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
You can tell. I'll let you know after. You let me know after.
We weren't talking about this.
I was-
Peter, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Right.
Oh, you Okay.
guys have a generous spot here. What is this?
Yeah,
Oh,
is it we can't get a better,
A little pullout.
do we have a better
There's
seat?
something.
Yeah, it's not very comfortable.
Well, that's all right. So you don't want me to stay too long.
It's
Huh?
the most comfortable folding chair we have.
Better
Uh,
than the ones in my room.
Representative Sheldon is
Yeah,
here
back
too. We updated our agenda, I think.
yesterday.
is here to introduce us to H394. So we'll introduce ourselves since I don't know.
There's a couple, actually, it's two gentlemen down here, and I think the only ones that don't know.
Okay, well, Representative.
Well, I'm Christopher Howland. I'm from Rutland 4.
Hi, nice to meet you. Amy Sheldon from Middlebury.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia too.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, so we're doing bill introductions. So Representative Sheldon is here with H394, which I think is a bill you said you spent some time on this summer in process.
I did, and I spent time along with some stakeholders, or Renewable Energy Vermont being one among them, and then Conservation Law Foundation and the Nature Conservancy. And I worked together to create the bill that's before you. The goal really was to both address some inefficiencies and in the development of renewables, but also some of the siting things that we didn't get around to looking at in the renewable energy standard updates from last year. So I, as many of you already know, I'm super interested in how to use our lands, and also I'm a supporter of renewable energy development. So the goal here is to continue or enhance how we promote development of renewables on already developed sites, including rooftops, backyard, and adjacent to already developed renewable energy sites, so that we are putting less stress on the forest and working lands that are kind of the greenfield developed areas. Without also trying to be realistic in the current environment around subsidies and some of the pressures on rates that we learned about last year. So, I mean, I can sort of high level, I'm not going to walk you through the bill, but I'll say that we're sort of balancing that desire for good siting out there in the landscape of renewables and also promoting efficiency in the development of them. So the very first section is incorporating Vermont conservation design into solar siting into enhanced energy plans. And actually, one thing, I don't know if you all have had the time, but I would really encourage you to take an hour with Bob Zano and learn about Vermont conservation design. So we adopted.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's foundational, I think, to understanding where certainly where our land use regulations are headed. And I would encourage kind of all developers of all kinds, including renewable energy developers, to look at that document and understand where they fit into the landscape in terms of what we've now codified as the vision for the state of Vermont, which is Vermont conservation design as a foundation for preserving an intact and functioning landscape for both people and wildlife. So that is one piece, is getting that Vermont conservation design into enhanced energy planning. And then encouraging net metering by having a sort of a floor or whatever, so that we continue to do net metering, maybe not at the rates that were once happening, but again, thinking about if we could do renewable energy development on rooftops and in people's backyards. First, we get the advantage of the distributed energy, but also less disturbance to our working lands and natural areas. And then there's some technical things. Again, I would go to the partners who help develop it, peers in the room, but the sort of elimination of the single plant determination, which is sort of a constraint on the development of renewable energy sites that limits adjacent developments from happening in places that it may be appropriate for them to happen. Having a 12-month limit on the granting of a certificate of public good on energy solars that is less than 5 megawatts. It does create a public energy advocate, and this is someone not just, it's sort of someone to help anyone who doesn't understand the system. So it could be a small-time renewable energy developer, but also be a concerned citizen who wants to engage in the process. So creating a position, I believe that's modeled on Massachusetts. We did look, Massachusetts got a little, they kind of got out ahead of us in some ways. There was a very big Audubon report on forest loss in Massachusetts that got me interested in, how do we make sure that as we build out our renewable energy infrastructure, we're not impacting those critical forest blocks that really make our working forests available for all the things we know they're important for. And one piece that I requested that didn't seem to got lost in the mix here is I'd really like you to consider a limit on solar developments over 5 megawatts. And I learned in this process that most solar developments, there's a gap in the sort of return on investment around a solar field. And so you see a lot of 5 megawatts happening. And then when it goes bigger, it goes a lot bigger. And those are the developments I think that become most shocking and out of scale to Vermonters. And so considering maybe putting a cap on the size of a renewable energy, a solar development at 5 megawatts. I don't purport to be the technical expert on all of these things. Again, I go back to a desire to balance impacts to our intact functioning landscape with the development of renewable energy so that we can have our own reliable grid.
So, thanks, Chair Sheldon. I have a couple of questions. I think it's a good idea for us to learn about the Vermont conservation design. So we'll get that testimony going. I know I'd be very interested in learning about that. And then just because you're way out ahead of us in terms of your years, way out ahead of me in terms of your years of experience on this issue. So we're in the section of statute here, and I'm sorry that I hadn't had a chance to look at this before, but determination of energy compliance, is that a process that any new energy generation thing, whether it's solar or anything else, has to receive? Is it?
I think that's part of the enhanced energy planning, right? And so that is for a town to receive, what is it? Right,
Substantial deficit.
Substantial deficits. Thank you. That's what your energy plan needs to include. And so I just thought that was an opportunity, again, just to draw attention to Vermont conservation design. I guess my experience has been that once people learn about and understand the goals behind Vermont conservation design, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, it comes from our Department of Fish and Wildlife, and it is a framework for the conservation of biodiversity in the state of Vermont that includes guidance. I'm going to say it's not a plan, but it's a guiding document to help us maintain 80% of the species in the state. And then, of course, your first question is what happens to the other 20%? The other 20% is intended, like, those are the ones that are more specialized that we've been targeting over time. So rare, threatened, endangered species have special plans and particular habitats. But this is a kind of a coarse scale framework for, in the face of climate change, and understanding that we are developing our landscape for human use, of course we are. What does the rest of the natural community need to survive, both with increased pressure from humans, but also from climate change?
Okay, so that section, basically we're in the whole section of law that governs what a regional or municipal energy plan has to already comply with in order to receive substantial deference for that plan with any citing or what the. So in other words, we're saying, in addition to the things that you already do in order to receive that benefit of substantial deference, you also need to, we're going to add this thing, you also need to comply with Vermont conservation designs.
Comply might be a little heavy. Okay, so it says to be consistent with the following. So you need to take it into consideration.
Take it into
And
consideration.
you can use it when you're making your enhanced energy plan. And I guess I just add, because I had an aha moment here. I come from Middlebury. People care about renewable energy and they care about the environment, and we do not have an enhanced energy plan. And I sort of was noodling on what does that mean. And I think as a planner, I was like, oh, wouldn't everyone want this? And I think the perception might be that energy plans are for towns that want to limit renewable energy. And I guess I was seeing it the other way, which is we want to say where we want it. This
Right.
is like an exciting opportunity. But I think that's something for both my committee and your committee to just be aware of and hold and kind of like the idea I thought was to help towns prepare for this type of development and also identify where they wanted it. And I continue to hold that hope as why we plan, so that communities can have conversations about where they want certain land use to occur and identify those areas, as opposed to just looking at limiting it.
Yeah. Okay. Questions? Yeah.
Sure. So I'm looking at page 3, and the only change there, which would say is achieving a level of deployment no less than 20 megawatt per year,
Yeah.
which is, I presume, seeking to spur more development. Do we know what the maybe Peter knows
Current rate
current rate is?
is 30.
What rate is 30? Okay. So why did we add this?
I think because it's been declining year over year.
So the message is, don't make rules that make it go down more.
I think just, don't give up on it entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, you all know there's pluses and minuses to net metering. And just trying to find that, right? Like, how do we encourage development on the built environment where people want it?
Right.
Without too much increased rate pressure.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Yeah, Rep. Sibilia.
Not a question, just a comment, noting that you all have taken the opportunity to correct the statute and update goals to reflect.
Thank you.
All right. Great. Well, it was perfect timing because we just walked through S50, which is about residential and about the solar, the expedited registration process. So it was good timing. Yeah, Rep. Clifton.
Presumably the creation of the public entity advocate will require an appropriation.
Yeah, it's in there.
So the last version.
Yeah, but be aspirational in our bills. And I would actually just note that, the Senate is sending you the bill of whatever 25 is the new 15.
That's 15. That's what we just
So you
walked
just
through.
did that. Okay. Yeah. So I think this lines up well. That section is in here as well. If you already says.
Yeah.
That's why Peter was here. All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Churchill.
He claimed copyright to that statement.
You did.
Yeah. You better get your wallet out and check with it.
That's right. He did take credit.
Look, another member of last year's energy committees here. All right. Take care.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, Rep. Logan, you have 4 bills.
I do.
Okay, so just any, I guess, numerical order.
Okay. I prepared to do them in numerical order, and that
Yep.
works well because
Or whatever order you have prepared.
the first
Numerical order.
three really are related to or the first 2 are more related to renewable energy and the PUC. They're all PUC related bills. We'll just put it that way.
Okay,
The third bill is more generally about the goals of the PUC, and the fourth bill is related to the clean heat standard.
okay,
Okay, so I'll start with page 327 whenever you're ready.
okay. You're getting there. Hang on one sec.
Oh, no rush.
Okay, 327, got it. Getting there.
We want Rep. Logan to introduce himself for the record.
Oh, yeah, thank you. For the record, you are.
I am Representative Kate Logan. I represent the Chittenden 16 district, which is central Old North End and downtown Burlington, and I serve on the Committee on Environment.
All right.
So page 327, I'll start off by saying that I the title is a bit of a misnomer for this bill. I didn't get this bill until pretty much the last day I could introduce, or I could approve it for introduction. So it says an act relating to labor requirements for certain energy projects. It's a bit broader than that, more about authorizing the PUC to make more specific requirements for contractors in the contracting process. So I'd say the general problem that this bill is trying to address is that we're shifting to utility scale solar projects that are going to be using PUC regulated ratepayer dollars to develop them. And we're doing so without appropriate oversight of the contractors who are bidding to develop these new energy, this new energy generation infrastructure. This is just an observation that I made during the last session while I was asking questions of utilities about the contracting process around. So, the various programs that they have that are to benefit low income ratepayers, for example. And so this bill would require any contractor who is bidding on a job to build solar infrastructure using PUC regulated ratepayer dollars would submit a copy of the contract with a line item budget after construction is completed. So I would be comfortable for this to happen during the bidding process, but a little bit of discussion with Ledge Council suggested that we start this way because this would be administratively more effective and it would offer the PUC the opportunity to go through this process a few times and decide if they want to move the process up. I would prefer, frankly, for it to happen at the time of bidding in order to be able to compare one contractor's bid against another. This is particularly important related to ensuring that we're getting least cost proposals that are fair. Kind of a subset of that would be to require those contractors to certify that they're either using union labor or any laborers who work on the project are earning the prevailing wage. And so that would be part of their certified line item budget that they're submitting for review. Again, this is so that we can ensure that least cost proposals are not least cost because they're undercutting workers, because we do want to be sure that infrastructure jobs pay well, that we're benefiting working folks in Vermont as much as possible through these projects.
Sorry, I took over.
Great, take over.
Everything's been running great.
Keep at it.
Question about what you know about what workers who work for these developers earn now.
You don't know anything.
You don't know anything.
No.
Great. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is this a problem? Are workers in the who are building the solar farms, and these are your utility scale projects you're talking about here, right? $100,000 looks like the threshold.
Yeah.
So and that would be the only situation in which ratepayer dollars would be involved. Would be if utility was building this.
Correct.
So we don't know what these folks are earning now. These workers through these developers, these generation facilities. Right.
I don't know how we would know that.
Yeah, I don't know how we could get that either,
Yeah.
although,
There are no known unionized.
Yeah.
Laborers in this workforce currently.
Yeah.
And so the workforce is not subject to a prevailing, or it is not required to comply.
right, so there's no regulation here, but I would.
Right.
But it's a regulation by market. You know, quote unquote. So
Mhm.
theoretically, there being a relative dearth of these workers, one would imagine they're fairly well compensated.
But
So some people don't think so. Do we have any idea?
I don't have any idea. I just, did I understand you correctly to say there are no known union members working on solar, utility scale solar installations?
as far as I know,
None of them are members
In
of the
Vermont.
Brotherhood of Electrical Workers or any of those unions?
not unless they're public projects.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Rep Selfridge?
Couple of questions, maybe a two-part question. You stated this comes after the build. And so the other part to that is if it comes after the build, is this enforceable and how?
So, that's why I would have preferred that we make this part of the bidding process. That would be my ultimate goal. So I think this is meant to be a provisional next step where all of this information is made publicly available 60 days after the construction project has been completed. So yes, this is a requirement. There's no enforcement mechanism here. But I would imagine that once we've gone through a few projects that are subject to this requirement, and those documents are reviewed, then we could determine whether or not we need to make the switch to this being an upfront requirement.
Thank you.
Victoria?
I'm just curious, are there other states in New England that have prevailing wage and union requirement?
No.
For utilities?
It's not that I'm aware of. There are versions of this in other states, but not quite like this with the bar. You see.
Okay. Okay. 352.
Yeah, so this is following on the Act 179 report. This is the Renewable Energy Standard report. One of the things that the Renewable Energy Standard did, Act 179 did, was it created a sunset for group net metering systems. So you can read that sunset language beginning on the bottom of page 5, because I do amend that language here in this bill on page 7. Another thing that was required in Act 179 was a study on coming up with a renewable energy for communities program, something to replace the group net metering program. And so this takes one section of the Act 179 report that recommended the development of a renewable energy for communities program, that said essentially that there was need to be work done to develop the program. So I can just discuss to you the purposes of the program. So one of the things that I would say the problem that I flagged while we were working on amending the renewable energy standard, what especially this sunsetting of group net metering, is that we're finally getting solar to scale and have seen some investment in ensuring that solar energy can benefit affordable housing communities and lower income ratepayers. And so up until now, the group net metering program has been very infrequently used and primarily used by developers in ways that were that are considered problematic. And so sunsetting the group net metering program will eliminate the problematic issues of group net metering, which I don't know if you've taken much testimony on that yet this year.
We're gonna do the Act 179 report soon, next week, I think.
Great. So the issue that creates, however, while eliminating the problems with group net metering, is that it's a really great way for, say, new affordable housing developments where, you know, like a little bit of on-site solar for single family residents would perhaps create a sufficient amount of generation to make it, you know, take a significant amount of the cost of electricity off of the residential bill on a monthly basis. But for a large affordable housing complex without much land, you can't put enough solar on site in order to be able to truly benefit that affordable housing community. One thing that having a sufficient amount of solar would allow an affordable housing developer, for example, we heard an example from Kathy Beyer last session, an offsite group net metering program would allow them to have enough solar capacity offsite to just have a single meter for the entire community so that no one has an electricity bill. So essentially sunsetting the offsite group net metering program sort of eliminates that option for affordable housing developments. I live in an affordable housing development in Burlington, a very densely developed section of Burlington in the central Old North End. The closest site to our property where we could develop a sufficient amount of solar to service our community of 40 households would be about 3 blocks away. So definitely not an adjacent parcel. Certainly not on parcel. We could probably put enough solar on our parcel to handle about 5% of our annual load. So this, in effect, creates a lot of barriers for communities like mine, where we have everything from folks on Social Security all the way up to market rate units. So it's a mixed income development. But if we were to adopt, say, let's say we've installed heat pumps in every unit, especially in Burlington, that would be beneficial because we don't have air conditioning in the building. We rely on natural gas. It would reduce our need for natural gas, extend the life of our boiler. It would allow everybody to have air conditioning. And if we could also pair that with an offsite group net metering development, then we could legitimately save our residents, some of whom are on very low fixed incomes, a lot of money over time. And so we're not seeing the benefits of net metering flow to the people who could benefit from them the most. So sunsetting group net metering at a time when we're actually ready to start developing these sorts of solar generation facilities to benefit specific communities, affordable housing developments, municipalities, school districts, is problematic. It just isn't going to save people money at a time when we could, especially, our municipalities, our schools, and affordable housing projects. So this study was required in that bill. That was the furthest we could push it last year. And so now I'm just taking PSD's recommendation that we create a renewable energy for communities program and turn it into a bill. There are some general requirements of that program, but doesn't get into the specifics because it needs to be developed. There's a list of stakeholders that would need to be consulted in order to develop the program, and then it should be implemented by January 1st of 2027. And then because it would not be implemented until January 1st of 2027 on page 7, I extend sunset for offsite group net metering to December 31st of 2026.
So Rep. Logan, this takes the Act 179 report, which is we're hearing about next week. So I love it when
Lines up
I
that
love
way.
it when we do it on purpose.
Do things in the right order.
I love when we do things in the right order. It's very disturbing to me when we don't. But anyway, yeah, we're hearing about the Act 179 report next week. So just to make sure I understood, so the successor, the net meter successoring program that we're going to be hearing about in the Act 179 report is this. And is this the same reef C program that's in 289? Do you have any idea? Or is it different?
I don't know.
Okay. Because we've got Bill H289 that we're starting to learn about, and it has the reef C program, but certainly didn't go line by line. I'm just wondering if your bill equals Act 179 equals 289. I just didn't have a chance to compare it.
Yeah, I haven't either. Unfortunately.
But this establishes the program. It's not a study. This establishes the program and then lays out guidelines for the program and deadlines for the program to actually be filled. And then it would kick in 2027.
That's right.
Okay. Questions?
Very close. Can I just have, so,
Yeah, probably the same
Yeah.
language, same drafter, same
Yeah.
instructions.
Okay.
so addressing the concern the utilities had about net metering, this offsite net metering focuses the program on specific categories of customers
Mhm.
and is there a requirement, or do you imagine there being a requirement that, for instance, your community, you build a solar farm, you will be the only customer for that one that's 3 blocks away? Or might it be shared
It's,
the way?
I think the goal is to create a program that does deliver at least cost for ratepayers. So I would imagine the larger the scale, the better it is for
There may be
ratepayers.
multiple communities using one.
I don't see why not.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I don't see
Thank
why not. I mean, I was open to this particularly after speaking with utilities and developers and who argued that we can do better than virtual net metering. We can come up with a program to benefit these communities that I'm talking about without and make it cost less for ratepayers.
So this focuses specifically on environmental justice focused populations as defined in 3 VSA 602, which is probably our environmental justice bill of 2022. And we're going to walk through that.
Yeah.
And then we've got affordable housing,
Yep.
schools, municipal buildings. Okay.
Yep. And then on the bottom of page 4, you'll see the list of folks who should be consulted in the design of the
In
program.
the design of the program. Okay. I think this idea is coming at us in a bunch of different ways. So
From every direction, it sounds positive.
it sounds always promising. Rep. Howland?
You mentioned, the energy be available, so it wouldn't be needed to, meter on the individual living unit.
That's true.
And are you aware of, back in the Carter years when, federally, they required units to go back into, to establish meter per unit because of the excess energy that was used when home occupiers weren't paying for any individual meters. There wasn't impetus to reduce consumption.
Mhm.
And this was I think it was 70s. I think it was 76. Somebody can tell me what years it was. But, so if they're not paying the meter, they don't shut off the light switch. There's not a incentive to
Yeah,
to conserve, and that's why we've got into this efficiency Vermont of these types. Efficiency Vermont, the utilities proceeded with efficiency measurements way before efficiency Vermont was established.
Right, okay, so sure, I understand the rationale there. But I do, if you're comparing, for example, the benefits of solar for a residential homeowner and still take advantage of net metering, and what might have $0 electrical bills for a decade. What we're finding with affordable housing communities that participate in other programs that have been developed for their communities that still maintain a meter for each household. What we're finding is like no matter how much you reduce the bill every month for them through some discount for affordable housing or something like that, you still can't eliminate the meter cost every month. So that's beneficial for households to be able to cut their energy costs down to $0 per month, take $25 additional off the cost of having electricity, especially for folks with fixed incomes. There are other ways of encouraging efficiency. The other thing I would say is if you did an inventory of the energy use in affordable housing, where the housing averages approximately 800 square feet per household, affordable housing occupants use approximately 20% of the electricity of a residential homeowner per month. So I would say affordable housing residents aren't the issue with energy use.
The affordable housing resident only occupies 800 square feet versus
On average,
versus a 16 or 15,000 square foot.
3,000.
Well, right,
Yeah.
not the 3,000.
Yeah.
But and I have no idea of what these are typically apartment complexes that were developed in the 70s that we were electricity was going to be too cheap to meter was the expression.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we've also had a lot of progress in technology since then. So our, light bulbs, appliances are all quite a bit more efficient, and we have really significant incentives for folks on that front.
all right. 350s. Oh, yeah, Rep.
Real
Corey.
quick.
Yeah.
So residents of mobile home parks would also have the ability to have.
I mean,
I know.
I would think that would be an environmental justice focused population. Residents, but that's a great question. I don't know who counts as an environmental justice focused population, but I do believe mobile home communities are one of those focused populations. But it would be helpful to hear from A&R on that.
When we walk through the EJ bill, let's remember to ask about that. I feel like those communities are included, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fairly certain.
Yeah. 353.
Okay. So this, again, sort of on my punch list after last session, this updates the general goals for our state energy policy. It's you'll see short, very small amount of changes I'm making here to the state energy policy to include the fact that we must ensure both affordability of energy, but also equitable distribution of energy burden at the household level. So this gets at a little bit of what I was just talking about, actually, the fact that the lower your income, the larger portion of your income you spend on energy. And so as we're talking about rate paying and programs that develop renewable energy, just sort of kind of across the broad spectrum of the state energy policy, that we should be trying to create more equitable distribution of energy burden at the household level. Energy burden is also a really broad term. It doesn't just refer to electricity. It also refers to the cost of heat, the cost of transportation, fuel, and the cost of electricity. So this does insert a little bit. These are questions I think would be good to discuss with the PUC using the term energy burden, because again, it is broader than electricity. It includes the household's total percentage of their expenses, monthly expenses on energy. And so that it would be, I think, especially as we're talking about affordability is one of our goals, making sure that lower income households, medium income households aren't paying an undue portion of their annual income on energy rather than construction. The other piece of this on page 2, I would actually, if I could redraft this again, I would strike the word beneficial. But it allows the PUC to include electrification. I use the term beneficial electrification because we're talking about things like installing heat pumps.
It's a term.
It's elsewhere in
It's a
statute.
term.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a term.
Yeah.
But you could just strike beneficial and just say electrification.
Yeah.
But that sufficient resources will be deployed to help folks electrify. So in addition to least cost integrated planning would now include efficiency, conservation, a goal of electrification. So that's the bill there.
Okay.
And I guess
Oh, I'm sorry, Rep. Southworth?
I'm just struggling with equitable distribution of energy burden at the household. How do you envision that being put into action?
That's a good question. So there are a number of different policies that you could put in place in order to try to achieve a goal of more equitable distribution of household energy burden. For example, the Renewable Energy for Communities program, or adopting an income sensitive ratepayer structure, or ensuring that a certain percentage of electrification initiatives benefit low to moderate income households, things that will make those households more efficient. So they'll be using less energy, so spending less money on energy, but also adjusting with the overall goal of making their cost of energy a lower percentage of their overall income. You could imagine a household with a high income might spend a very small fraction of their annual income per year on their energy costs.
So would you be talking about a cost shift from somebody with a higher income rate to the lower income rate?
Potentially.
I'll dive in to what I think this bill would accomplish. My assumption, and I have not read 30 VSA 202, but my assumption is that we're at that this is probably the very high level overarching values-driven part of our state energy policy that then, you know, specific actions flow from, right? So a lot of times in statute, you'll see, you know, like it says here, it's our general policy that everything we do in this statute and all the bills we enact and all the energy plans we do and stuff are going to follow these high-level values. So it feels to me like you're suggesting we add another value or consideration that would drive our energy planning, drive our policies. So it doesn't dictate specific policies or, you know, plans.
But it
Or,
does suggest it. That's.
it suggests it, yeah, but there wouldn't be specific. It's more like when we do this kind of work, let's make sure that we're aligned with affordability, equitable distribution of energy burden, economic vitality, efficiency, et cetera. Okay,
Yeah,
I
so it
understand.
would be just another item on the list that would serve as a metric for assessing our state energy plan.
Okay. Okay, I get that. Rep Torrey?
I'm thinking back to last session and we did, direct the PUC to look into a statewide energy assistance program, and that would be another potential.
Yeah, that
example
would be an example. Yeah, an energy assistance program. Yeah,
that doesn't come from other rural, you know, customers who can't, or the cost shifts.
right. The cost shift internally to the utility, like WEC or something like that. Yeah, to have a statewide program rather than a utility specific program. Yeah, but that study will be here next year. I think it's next year is when you'll take it up for consideration. So it's not ready, but
What study is that?
I have to look it up. Remember,
that was also in Act 179, wasn't it? Or-
is it mentioned?
I think that's where we put it. I can't remember where we put it. No, it was in another bill. I'm sorry.
Housekeeping bill.
It was in the housekeeping bill, the PUC bill. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
that's right. So that study though won't come back for you until next session.
Victoria, could you find that?
Yes.
And just send us, just so we know what study we're anticipating and when. Great. Rep Putnam?
And this is on the subject of reducing the energy burden for low-income households. It seems to me that's pretty consistent with a lot of current policy. We put our weatherization dollars, we provide more subsidies to lower income in its efforts to reduce the burden. So
Right, we're already doing a lot of this. And so just want us to be aware of what we're doing
yeah,
and what the impact is at the household level. It just isn't part of our planning process right now, intentionally. So you might read reports from the from Efficiency Vermont. They'll include an analysis of energy burden at the household level in their report, but we don't require it. They just do it. But we might want that. We might want others to contribute to that as well, like Vermont Gas and the Burlington Energy, you know, Burlington Electricity Department, anyone who's contributing to that effort. We would like to know the full impact of all of those programs that are currently in implementation that are driving down energy burden at the household level and making it more equitable. And then we'd also like to see some actual intentional planning around, you know, what's a reasonable amount that we could, what are all the different tactics we have are available to us for driving down the total energy costs at the household level. What do we want? Yeah, what do we want to do?
So the utilities that came in here and specified, or testified, excuse me, Burlington Electric has a low income situation. Green Mountain Power has a 75% for people of.
Yeah, their energy assistance for their, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so they all have some energy efficiency programs. Are you intending this to be one statewide concept from all the other 17 utilities of?
So this isn't a program, it's just a goal of our state energy policy is that we would be implementing our energy policy would aspire to reduce.
So this is a policy statement.
This is a policy statement. It requires in our energy planning that we try to aim towards this. We're aiming towards affordability, trying to encourage the state's economic vitality. We're trying to do all of these things with our state energy planning, and we should also be trying to do this. We're already doing a lot of this, but it's not framed out in terms of our state's energy policy. Yeah. And it doesn't require any particular distribution of energy burden at the household level, just that we're trying to make it more equitable. And it doesn't define what equitable means either. So that's up to us to define it more clearly if we'd like to.
There we go. The definition again.
Yeah.
Affordable. All right. Good. Is that good for more questions on that bill? We have one more bill.
Good.
Okay. Rep. Logan, hang in there.
Yep, almost there.
Okay.
So, as I'm sure you're all aware, we also had a report back on the clean heat standard. One of the recommendations out of that report was to establish a thermal efficiency benefits charge on unregulated fuels. On page 3 of this bill is where the policy change lies within the context of the current statute. So this would create a thermal efficiency benefits charge. This would be a volumetric charge that would be used to pay for thermal efficiency programs. And it'd be a charge on fuels that would then go into the electric efficiency fund.
Is this, and I'm sorry again that I didn't check.
Is that Joanne's?
No, that wasn't what I was gonna ask.
Presumptuous of Nancy.
Yeah, how presumptuous of you. I was gonna ask, and I didn't go back to check it before you came in today. I know that the PUC in its clean heat checkback report recommended or suggested an alternative path would be a thermal efficiency benefits charge. Is this structured the same way as what okay.
Yes.
So basically this is just picking up from that second checkback report, what the PUC recommended or suggested or said we could consider as an alternative path.
To the,
Clean heat standard, complicated, not scaled properly for Vermont. You might want to look at a thermal benefits charge, and this language is similar to the way they structured it.
Yes.
Okay.
Or if that was the attempt.
Okay.
So recognizing that it seemed unlikely that we were going to be implementing rules for the clean heat standard this year, I felt it was important to draft a bill that would implement the recommendation of the PUC. So that
PUC recommend the funds flowing into the electric efficiency fund, or did they establish?
Yes, I believe so. I mean, I don't know. It's been
a while.
Couple months now since I've been working on this. But yeah, there was. I'm actually trying to go back and remember the discussion that we had around this. Originally, legislative council was suggesting to me that funds go into an alternative location, and then I referred back to the study, I believe, and had her clarify that it should go into the electric efficiency fund.
You might be thinking of one of our bills that's changed the name of that fund to energy, I think.
Yeah.
Or had just struck electric, so that it would also take in the legislation and I think maybe it's S56.
Energy efficiency
65.
fund.
Yeah,
The energy.
they changed the name of that.
Yeah.
I think for that very reason, because.
Yeah, it can bring in thermal. And then I think I'm actually thinking about another bill, the conversation that I had around another bill, but, that I've already presented to you, the one that's more focused on energy efficiency utilities work.
Right.
It's
Right.
been moving through the committee process over on the Senate's.
Okay. Great. Wow, right on time. Crazy. All righty. Rep. Logan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we can go off while